start to get everyone to take a seat? Can we get everyone to sit down? Now it's on. It's on now. It helps when it's on. There's a few seat ups front, but we might call on you. Right. Yeah, we're gonna. All right. Woo. Welcome to BioArbor tonight. Today's talk is on quantified self. Can we turn this little feedback? It's too loud for me. Just wanted to point out that this event is sponsored primarily by the Fast Forward Medical Innovation Program at the University of Michigan, and then the law firm of Brinks, Gilson, and Leon, IP law firm here in town, MishBio, and of course the venue sponsor is Spark. We are always looking for great topics with BioArbor. If you find people with the green name badges, feel free to grab them and give topics and ideas. But here's the steering committee we have. It's in a wide range of groups. I'll kind of skim through it. And then the sponsors as well with Bill over at Brinks, Alyssa, who runs events here at Spark, and Dave McGuire, who's over there as well. Before I get going too far, there's some little things over there in the corner, little flyers. If the quantified self is an interesting topic, where'd Spencer go? Right? Talk to Spencer. There's a quantified self meetup group here in town as well. You can continue these conversations in the future. But I'm going to introduce quickly Steve Kunkel. Steve is the Senior Associate Dean of Research in the medical school, where he provides direction for the school's research enterprise. He's also the endowed professor in pathology research, co-director of the general pathology. His area of research centers on assessing molecular mechanisms of lung inflammation. The impact that he has had of immunology and inflammation is rather impressive. I kind of wrote down a few notes here that he's authored or co-authored more than 500 peer-reviewed manuscripts, 60 chapters, editor 4 books, multiple NIH grants. He's a recipient of the NIH Merit Grant. He's an associate editor of various scientific journals. He's co-chair of the board for the scientific counselors for the NIH. Trust me, the list goes on. Without further ado, Steve will introduce our guest.
Thank you, Wes. I've had a lot of help in my career, and I don't have time to name them all. So I would like to just start by giving a little bit of a history of how we got to some of the situations and the point we are right now, especially from the standpoint of the medical school. 5 years ago, the Office of Research reached out to Connie Chang and asked her to come to the University of Michigan as her husband was being recruited in the GI department at that time, because we desperately needed a person to run what we were calling our business development team. At that time, we would realize that we were really behind the 8 ball in the medical school with regards to standing up and having relationships with our industrial partners. And Connie, coming from a business and marketing background, was the perfect person to come in and really do the initial impact assessment, standing up, building her own team and reaching out, and during her very short term, quickly turned into arranging a number of relationships with the University of Michigan and our industrial partners into the millions of dollars. A couple years ago, the University of Michigan was fortunate to recruit Kevin Ward from Virginia Commonwealth to come to the University of Michigan. And I initially realized that Kevin actually had not only deep expertise in emergency medicine, where he's a professor, but also in entrepreneurial and innovation. So what we finally did was to merge Connie's business development team with Kevin Ward under a rubrics what we called Fast Forward for Medical Innovation, which actually ended up being one of our enablers or the infrastructure, because we realized that our faculty did not have the bandwidth to go out and reach out to identify all of the partners that could be out there. We did not have a translational research fund of people that actually had standed up experiments in their lab, had some very good ideas, but actually died in what we all know as the valley of death. And actually working with Connie and Kevin, forming the Fast Forward for Medical Innovation, we've actually have a fairly robust activity going on right now, which actually resulted in a number of partnerships, especially with BioArbor. And I'd like to give a shout out to BioArbor for helping us arrange this. As I mentioned, I owe a lot of kudos to Kevin Ward, but I'd just like to give a little bit of his background. He was educated and got his undergraduate degree at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, went on to receive his MD degree in New Orleans at Tulane, a green waiver. He then went on to do his post-graduate education at Pittsburgh, going to Virginia Commonwealth, and we were extremely fortunate enough to be able to recruit him here. He is highly innovative. He's extremely interested in data analysis, especially wave data analysis, interested in going into the ER or the emergency room and taking data coming off the EKG and saving that data to be interpreted later on. And Kevin will be able to fill us in more about those activities. Our other guest is Ivor Stivorek, who is the co-founder and chief technological officer of Jawbone. He came from a firm that he co-founded, was called Body Media, and he's always had an interest in understanding how to capture information by wearable computer devices. And some of his statistics that I'd like to just share with you is he's had over 90 patents since 1999. And one of the most jaw-dropping observations that was noted, and I'm going to have to read this, it says he has organized one of the largest living databases of raw and real-world human sensor to date on the planet, and has captured over 500 trillion sensor points, which is absolutely amazing. I mean, I remember when I was growing up listening to Carl Sagan when he talked about all of the stars and the galaxies that are out there. There's trillions and trillions of them. And we have the ability to capture trillions and trillions of databases. We're extremely fortunate to have these two august individuals to share their information with us today. And I would like to just get into the program and ask Kevin to come on up and fill us in. You're going to come back? You're back, Wes.
But Steve, I have read close to all 500 of your papers. I've only got 25 more to go. They're great. It's great stuff.
So what I thought I'd do next is this is a diverse group of people, and not everyone is familiar with this space. There's a lot of pharma, there's a lot of med device, but not necessarily people who understand the quantified self. So I thought I'd give kind of a primer of what is quantified self, and it is essentially just the data acquisition analysis of what your one's daily life, whether this is writing something down or watching what you eat, measuring your blood levels if you have diabetes or something along those lines, or which is becoming more and more popular, exercise. And this has been very much has taken off with the advent of wearable sensors, so that you can accumulate this data and you don't have to manually go and log this data, and you have these massive amounts of computing power that weren't available to us not that long ago, sitting in our pockets. And there's a couple guys that is often a contribute to of Gary Wolf and Kevin Kelly. So next I wanted to kind of put things in perspective to see what kind of stuff is going on. People think, okay, well, maybe 6 or 7 people are doing this. But so I went to, Susanna Fox is the lead studier at Pew's Research Center on the Internet and Mobile Life, and she did 2 studies, two fairly recent ones, one in January of 2013 called Tracking for Health and Mobile Health, and this is where I've got some of this data, just to put things in content and perspective. Basically, 7 in 10 people are trackers, are tracking data about themselves. Now, this is everything from their weight to their glucose levels to their fitness. So we call them trackers, and when we use trackers, this is what I'm referring to, and this is the population of the U.S. Also, 1/5 of smartphone users have some sort of health app on there right now. Now, of those health apps, 38% are related to exercise. That could be anything from pedometers and wearables to logging your runs and those sort of things. 31% of some sort of related to diet, nutrition, calorie counters. By the way, this is also a job-owned company. That's the Massive Health. So taking this a little bit more to the healthcare side is 45% of the U.S. adults are dealing with at least one chronic condition. And the reason I bring this up is because the rate of tracking things about yourself goes up when you have one or more chronic conditions. So 61% track with no chronic condition, which represents 55% of the U.S., but of people, 61% track with no chronic condition. 70% track have at least one chronic condition. That's of 24% of the population. And 80% with two or more conditions, which is 20% of the population, are trackers. So there's a lot of people tracking themselves. And with chronic, we have a wide range. And these are two FDA-approved devices with the AliveCore, the ECG, which goes to any smartphone. You can buy that now. And then J&J with LifeScan have a Bluetooth-enabled glucose meter that goes straight to your phone. You can start keeping track of your glucose. And then there's even more things out there. We can go all the way to 23andMe with where you spit and find out your genome. To I was talking to someone the other day about the Lumo Lift, right, where you can this tells you if you're slouching or not, with a little simple lapel pin. It could be part of the chronic problem of back issues. So I guess it starts putting in what do we do with this information, and this is kind of where I think some of this topic would be good to hear from the speakers. But most trackers aren't really sharing this information. They're just keeping it to themselves. So 34% are actually sharing it with another person or group. And of that 34%, only roughly half of that is actually with a clinician. And we can do that. That actually goes, those numbers are better for people with two or more conditions. But it also gets to the point that we're collecting all this information about ourselves and how we're doing, but we're not actually sharing that with the people who could probably help us the most. But there's an interesting component of this. As we look at it ourselves, 46% of the trackers say it changed the way they maintain their health. It changed their behavior a bit, or at least someone they care for. A lot of the trackers are actually people who are tracking someone else. 40% led to new questions to a physician or got a second opinion based on the information they have from tracking themselves. And 34 said it affected how they were treating an illness or a condition. And of course, all those numbers, these are aggregate numbers, all those are even higher if we're talking about people with chronic conditions. And of course, I get into we've got now a proliferation of sensors and a better ability to analyze data. Are we going to push towards that human check engine light that, which would be kind of great? I could use an oil change. What does the future hold for this? And that's where I think we're going to go. But before we do that, Evo's got a few slides as well. If they could change to in the back of the room, they'll change the slides. And I'll turn it over to you. You want to say anything before?
Oh, sure. Well, I can give my spiel on this. So I'm an emergency physician, and I practice emergency medicine and critical care. And I've been doing this for over 20 years. And I can tell you, I have no fewer tools now to help save patients than I did over 20 years ago. And that's unacceptable to me. So we have smaller things. So I have ultrasounds that are really tiny now. I've got faster CAT scanners. But I don't have really anything that fundamentally has changed the way we practice and has improved survival. So from a critical illness and injury standpoint, anyone want to guess how much an average health system spends on that? So these are, you're critically ill and injured, you've been in a trauma, you've got an overwhelming infection, you've had a massive heart attack, you've had a cardiac arrest, and we've got you back. That proportion of costs that we spend to the health system is what? Anyone want to just venture a guess? Well, trillions, but for an individual hospital, it's over 40% of the cost. For our hospital, it's 65%. Okay, but we don't have any fundamental technology. So for my practice, you move through different echelons of care. You get in a car accident, then you come to the ED, then you go to the operating room, then you go to the ICU, then we discharge you, and then you come back because of some complication. It's a never sort of ending cycle in regards to that. Where I started to get interest in the quantified self is through my work with the Department of Defense. So my fundamental research interest is combat casualty care. So any day that I think I have it bad in the emergency department, it's a great day compared to the challenges that exist on the battlefield. So because of that sort of austere environment, I met Ivo, I don't know, how many years is it now? 5 or 6 years ago when I was in Virginia, at Virginia Commonwealth University, and we saw Ivo's product. And, you know, the solutions that we really have to...
Hold on. You called me up and said, this is smoke and mirrors.
Well, I did that too. I did that too.
So these guys told me I have to talk to you, but I don't know why
true.
I'm talking
That's
to you.
true. So I'm a physiologist by training, and so again, as we sort of move into this over the next hour or so, it's going to be really important for ask ourselves, like, just because you can measure it, should you measure it? I mean, does it really bring any value? So I'll digress a minute and say, in my field, everyone knows what blood pressure is. Everyone knows what heart rate is. Does everyone know what a pulse oximeter is? It's a small device that measures oxygen in your blood. Those three variables have been responsible for more deaths in emergency medicine and critical care than you could ever imagine. Why? Because those variables at a fundamental level change too late. They change too late before I can detect something early. So again, a lot of this discussion is, just because you can measure it, is it helpful? Or are there other components to the quantified self diving deeper into the signal to pull stuff out that we don't traditionally look at? But my venture with Evo after the smoke and mirrors thing was thinking about, listen, we really need some science fiction solutions that are going to help us save people on the battlefield, okay, where there is no golden hour. And if one combat medic has to take care of 5 or 6 wounded colleagues, and he's got a rucksack that's this big, and it's got 2 liters of fluid and a handful of bandages, he's got to determine who is the most ill and injured, okay? So there's a general rule in emergency medicine. It's called the rule of threes. In a certain big disaster or firefight, 30% of the people will die no matter what you do. 30% of the people will live no matter what you do because they're too well. But the 30% that will live or die based on the decisions that you make, which means that I'll say that someone is sicker than they really are, and I'll expend resources on that person that I really don't need to. And then that person I don't think is too sick is really a lot sicker. And so with the epidemic of chronic diseases, for example, if you have high blood pressure and you get in a car accident, you come see me in the emergency department, and your blood pressure is 120 over 80, we're all feeling pretty good about ourselves, okay? But your blood pressure usually runs 160 over 90. So 120 over 80 is totally bad for you, or maybe you're on some heart medications. So I can't even use tachycardia or fast heart rate because you're on a cardiovascular medication that prevents your heart from beating fast. Or you come with an infection, but you took Tylenol or Motrin before you came, so I can't even use fever as an indicator. So just simple vital signs end up being not very helpful. So if you're chasing Al-Qaeda on the battlefield and you get wounded, well, your heart rate's fast, but you were just in a gunfight. Okay, maybe you have a broken leg, and so, but you've not lost any blood, and so that becomes hard to know if your heart rate or your blood pressure is out of whack just because you've broken a leg or you've lost blood. So again, simple things like taking even a blood pressure with a blood pressure cuff and a stethoscope is really problematic under fire. Okay, and so looking at what Body Media at the time, now they've gone big. It's Jawbone now. Should I just call Jawbone, or is it a venture? Okay.
Well, we were still,
Yeah. Okay.
still have a
Okay.
We still have a running entity that's a medical device entity underneath.
So we looked at jawbone, but we looked deep. So they were claiming things like if you wear this thing, we can actually tell you how much oxygen you're consuming a minute. And so we did a partnership and got some money from the Department of Defense to use sort of these low-level signals. So it was looking at skin temperature and galvanic skin response, and you'll go into to the other things that they measure and say, could we do some artificial intelligence? We had a big interest in using computational medicine and artificial intelligence to sort of take sort of these low-level signals, which wouldn't be contaminated by a lot of noise, and say, could they bring some value to this? So we got a grant from the Army, and we went into their labs. And sure enough, we were able with the team to take some of these really low-level signals that could be collected while people were active and actually develop an algorithm that told us with pretty good accuracy how much blood you had lost before you actually had some abnormal vital signs. So for me in my practice, and I think for even for chronic disease management, what you want to do with the quantified cell from a healthcare standpoint is to predict things before they occur, okay? So not only be predictive, but also be prescriptive in terms of what can I do to mitigate either that return to the hospital, for example, or something before you become overtly unstable. How many people are wearing a Fitbit? Yeah, okay. So Fitbit has this new product. It's called the Quantified Rash. Okay, so you put it on, and you develop this rash. It could tell you how big the rash is. It could tell you how bad.
I did not ask you to say that.
Yeah, I know. But in any event, the thing is, you've got to we've got to get this out there. And I would say this is a technology or technology space that's really early in its infancy. So what you'll see here is there's a lot of things out for the consumer market, help you lose weight. What the data really lacks for us to really, and we're really interested in going after this from a science aspect, is does it mean anything for really health? So while you quoted some numbers that people think that they manage their health differently, what we haven't really ascertained is whether it really makes a difference in the disease process. So you guys, I don't know if you guys have heard of the medical home provider issue where we really want teams to take care of medical conditions in the home. Recent study that showed that it doesn't work. So you can try to manage, and this was done in the pediatric population, where you try to really closely manage complex diseases like high blood pressure, obesity, asthma, those sorts of things, at least in children and adolescents, and you have close oversight by medical professionals, found out it didn't really make a difference. So we have to ask ourselves, is it because the data we're currently collecting is not valuable, or are we not looking at that data correctly, or do we actually need to go beyond and do some deeper sensing? So Ivo is going to go into some more about what these things can monitor. As a clinician and a physiologist, I need to know what these things mean. The reason I was, and we continue to work with Jawbone on a number of fronts to try to help with the critically ill and injured and the high-risk patients who get discharged so we can prevent readmission, is because I believe some of the things that the monitor or the wearable monitor actually detects are deeply linked to physiology, okay? So that's the difference. This is more than actigraphy monitoring or pedometry. So if it's not linked to physiology, that really ends up becoming a tough sell, I think, for medicine, especially as you move forward through the regulatory pathway.
Transition. It's a good slide to start with. Before we get into these slides, a couple different things. What Kevin just brought up and was bringing up, and all these stats about people watching things, this check engine light. I mean, on the battlefield, in the hospital, at home. I mean, I think a lot of times you find out it's amazing how many opportunities in terms of people's friction out there, in terms of what they're dealing with in their life, has to do with they don't have a dashboard for their own self or what's going on in the context. We have it for our cars and we have it for our coffee makers, but we don't have it for ourselves, or the doctor doesn't really have what's really going on in your life. And so I think we should come back to that some more, because I think it's an interesting concept. I'm going to disappoint you on the slides because I'm not going to go into all the sensors and all the great work we've done. I think we can talk about it.
I'm out of here.
We can argue about it. I was going to try to take a little different approach on the meta side of this kind of stuff. First of all, thanks to BioArbor and University of Michigan for having Jawbone represented here. It's great to come in. I've had a few visits and great community here. It's great to be in this room with a bunch of pitchers and a bunch of people who are like passionate about what they're doing. I was listening as I was walking around, and everyone's really excited about what they're doing, and it's to have an audience like this and people doing that kind of stuff. Hopefully we get a chance to engage a little bit more as the evening progresses, but it's great to have that kind of stuff all across the country and inside our company, actually, getting all excited about these kind of opportunities. So to back up for a second, I was asked to give a little background about what I've been doing for the last 20 years, just so you guys have a little bit better sense, because a lot of people actually don't know Jawbone. They don't know about these trackers and so forth. So about 20 years ago, I was actually doing wearable computing when glass was about 10 pounds or 5 pounds. We were doing things where people go into like fuselages of airplanes to fix things. But instead of having like manuals stacked up here and trying to figure out how to do something where it's not superimposed in your environment, where with a head-worn display you can actually see what to fix in a timely manner. And we were taking like 10-hour chores and turning them into 40 minutes. So a lot of research I was doing at Carnegie Mellon. It was interesting, but then when you talked on the street to people like, what do you do for a living? I said, I make wearable computers. I go, oh, that's cool. But like, what would I use that for? And then if you turn the sensors around, though, we started learning that if you turn them around instead, I do wearable body monitors, people actually might get it. Although 15 years ago, those stats weren't anything close when we started Body Media. The awareness was out there. The relevancy of people monitoring things might have been out there, but not the market that it is today. It's kind of interesting. Although I was saying to someone earlier today, it's about the fifth hype cycle in wearables that I've been through in 20 years. It's a lot more real, a lot more money, but I think, certain things are a little bit still new or in its infancy. So we built technology. I'll talk just about the technology, not about all the interfaces, and we can talk a little bit later about some of the outcome studies we've delivered. But we put things on people's upper arms that had these physiological sensors. It was multi-sensor in nature, some of Kevin's points. So it wasn't just pedometry; it was heat flux and the way the heart was beating, and also the way what was happening with galvanic skin response and emotion response in the body and so forth. And we had this notion that multi-sensors could actually get you to something that was hopefully a little bit better than smoke and mirrors. You should have seen the test he put us through. I've never been so challenged with our algorithms. But what's interesting today is that because of convergence with technology, you can actually meld it or mold it, and it's all like once you have a circuit board and the convergence of some of these sensors and where things are at today and the power that they're getting less hungry. They're still an issue, but they're way less hungry than they used to be. You can actually turn them into, it's clay-like in terms of what you can do with it and package them in brand new ways. And so that same circuit board can be something that becomes disposable. Like on the right, this is a joint venture we're doing with Avery Dennison with a spin-off they had with Vansiv, which is a disposable patch, 7-day assessment product, still multi-sensor, still running algorithms. We have these wristbands. And then we have these armbands that you wear to have even more sensors in them. And so that same technology is really like you can move it across different application spaces, different opportunities. So a lot of people will say like, well, that wristband will never work for this. Well, in the end, if you have wearables working in certain ways, you can have lots of different form factors that might fit into people's lifestyle. And really my presentation, just as an intro, was more about just, what we do to fit into people's lifestyle. So if you don't know Jawbone, 15 years ago, when we started Body Media, Hossein, so to Steve's point, I'm not a founder or co-founder of Jawbone. I'm a co-founder of Body Media. Hossein, Raman, and Alex are founders of Jawbone, and they started with a wearable, which is a headphone that could actually noise cancel, so that when you're on your cell, a big part of friction of talking on a cell phone is all the ambient noise. So they're getting rid of that user opportunity. They really wanted to do Siri. But how could you do Siri if you couldn't actually understand what the hell the person was saying? So they started with this wearable side, so it was kind of a parallel journey that we've taken. And then we knew Bluetooth, and everyone was trying to listen to sounds and consume media with these little 7 circles on the bottom of your phone. It's like, what kind of experience is that? And so we got into this. We redefined a whole new category of wireless Bluetooth speakers, which is now just blown up all over the world. And then we started with, Jawbone in particular started getting into the health side with the wearables. And And what we like about that story when we have like multiple product lines and it's not just wearables, is that, a lot of people talk about the Internet of Things. And I would say a lot of times they're just about a bunch of objects that may or may not be connected, and really they're pretty dumb. They have no context. They don't understand what they're doing. They might be connected, but who the hell cares? And a lot of times you see these diagrams and they never put the person in the middle. Like, what the hell? Why can't you put why is it should be about the individual. But even in the end, and then you start thinking about, well, it's not signals just on people. It's actually signals around people and even the weather and so forth that you'd be merging. So these trillions of data points start to become much broader. And honestly, when you put that person in the middle, you start really realizing what's going on. Whether it could be the hospital, but it's also like at work and at the home and in your car. The Internet of Things and all this understanding doesn't really matter if it can't be contextually sensitive to actually what's happening and what's in your world. Like if it doesn't understand that I'm in a meeting and understands my schedule and so forth, then it's going to start buzzing me and doing all sorts of things that have nothing to do with what might be the context now. And so how could these wearables and other signal processing and data fusion that we do actually develop a world or create these interactions that are more context sensitive? And so yeah, it could be for better health. I'll give you a couple examples, but it could also just be that you just feel better when you walk in the house. I'll give you a couple. Let me see. Let me give you two quick scenarios. One is on the like diabetes, right? Glucometer. It's a number. A lot of people don't use glucometers because the number is in a vacuum. You get the number, you don't know why it's there. It has no context. You don't know what you were doing before. You don't know what you were doing after or during the reading. Same thing with blood pressure. Same thing when you came into the ER. All these different things. So even a stupid little wearable that's smoke and mirrors could actually give context to something that's quite diagnostic in the space. On another side, to use a consumer example, had a really shitty day at work. Excuse my language. But it was really bad. And then I'm driving in 90 minutes of traffic because I happen to live in Silicon Valley, which I don't, but let's just say this person does. And they come home. I know all this stuff happened, and I understand their mood. So as they're walking up the stairs to their house, I've already pre-connected the house to make it a little bit cooler, so when I come in, it's not so stressful. I've made it. I already know it's you, so I open up the door for you, so you don't have to go fumbling for keys. As I come in, I know the house knows that I'm a little bit upset, or my world knows. So it gives me a little Twitter feed of music of one of my favorite songs, and I just give it a thumbs up, and all of a sudden music comes in the house. And then my nephew has sent me a picture, and my TV actually understands that if it shows me this picture of my nephew with this little message, that it might just alleviate this whole day.
I have that. It's called my wife.
There it is.
I mean,
no. What you're missing in that whole idea is that you put onto your wife all these other things instead of getting yourself in other situations so that your relationship could actually be stronger. So these are frictions that we may or may not have in our lives, but I think that's the way we think at Job Owners about what are the experiences. It could go all the way to the medical and diagnostic side. It could just be like, hey, you woke up and feeling better, and you don't even know why, but it's because we're starting to automate or give some opportunities around you.
We're here all week, so.
There we are. So, when we talk about wearables, when we talk about health, I think as I'm with Jawbone, what we have is an opportunity to help you live better, where health might be a subset, which is not always maybe in this community or under discussions when you talk about these health trackers, not everyone thinks about it as a potential subset. They think about it as a superset. And, everyone is a consumer out there also. And a lot of times we think about people who have conditions or people who are patients or people who are just trying to lose weight, and we think of them in an institutional way. And honestly, if those numbers are going to go up and those numbers have any meaning that Wes was talking about, it's because the consumer's first, and I am a consumer first, and it's about living life better and not about feeling sick or being positioned as being sick. And then hopefully the communication I have with my doc is a lot richer because I'm not, go ahead, ask me how many times I worked out last week.
How many times did you work out last week? 3.
I lied.
Prove it.
Right. Ask me how was I eating well? Oh yeah, I was eating well. I had three days in a row had pizza, right? Right. How was I sleeping? Oh, I'm sleeping 8 hours. Oh, actually it's 4 hours a night because my kid keeps getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and also not going to bed till like 12 or 1. So like all this stuff is happening in this interaction. I'm lying to you the whole time. You have no context. I'm lying to myself because I have no dashboard, right? So it's kind of it's part of the opportunity here of quantifying, but hopefully it's not quantifying in this kind of like cold way. Hopefully it becomes a little bit more interesting and warmth and emotive. I'll stop with that as an introduction to what we're doing at Jawbone, so we can get into some of the topics that Wes.
Sure. And we'll open the floor up for questions as well. There's a microphone back there. If you can queue up behind there. But I get to begin as the joy of being the moderator. And doctors have been telling their patients for years to stop smoking, eat better, exercise, but they don't necessarily do that. So how is measuring yourself in these manners, or having this information, allow or get the patients to actually take action on the data?
I'll start with that. I mean, like I said earlier, when we were thinking about body media, we kept realizing there is no dashboard. Like, I could do a diagnostic product, I could do something in sports, but the rest of us have no idea what's going on in our lives. Probably a good example of that is most people who use our stuff, top 3 reason why they love wearing the product is because it tells them something about sleep. Like, they might have done it for weight management, but it's like sleep, we're unconscious. We have no idea. And it makes stress in our lives. We become groggy. We don't have any energy. It's hard to lose weight if you're not sleeping. And all these things get affected by sleep, yet we don't do anything. We don't have a lot of intervention around it. And tracking that, it was like an eye-opener for people. But they had no idea. So they thought they did, but they didn't know. So just putting the dashboard and that feedback in front, we found has been quite successful. A lot of people say, do people really do it? I mean, I've got people who have been with us 3, 4, 5 years working with the products. We've got people who have done it for 3 months, and then they decide to go away because they've reached their goal. We've got outcome studies that we've done in different universities where they've shown like people doing it in their current intervention program versus working with the technology on their own or with an interventionist. And we're seeing, like, in 15 years, I've seen a pedometer study that showed like 50% improvement. We've seen 2, 4, 5, 7x improvement on the results because they had the technology and the dashboards as a way of talking more and talking about tomorrow versus about yesterday, and not about lies, but something objective. So I actually think they can do it, and they will do it. And it may not be the first reason they do it, to my point earlier. They may use it for other reasons. But I think if it's done well, with the software included, I didn't show you any software shots or anything like that, I actually think it can be quite positive and quite proactive. I'm going to say one more thing. Just the other day, I was at a talk, and a guy comes up to me, shakes my hand, and says, "Ivo, thank you for inventing body media." And I go, "Why, man? What's going on?" And he goes, "Look at me. I'm 200 pounds less. I don't have diabetes. I run with my kids. All this. I get letters like this all the time, and they go like, 'Dude, that's awesome.' So send me that testimonial. I'll send you like 3 new products, whatever, right?" But like, it doesn't stop. After 15 years, I do not stop. I have goosebumps when someone comes up and says that to me. And it's a stupid little smoke and mirrors product that has some AI behind and stuff like that. And I think it can catch on with certain. This guy told me he has tried everything for 20 years. And he never had the opportunity because he never had kind of an understanding of himself and how sleep affects activity and food affects this. And he was able to put it all in one place and not Excel spreadsheets like a lot of quantified selfers do. No offense, but that's what happens. And it was a really nice story. And I get lots of them like that.
So, from a physician standpoint, we love good stories. I mean, the issue is how we're going to make it happen. And so just because you build it, will they come, and will they actually end up using it? So, I'll get on my soapbox here. I mean, the thing with the Accountable Care Act is everyone's responsible for something except who? The patient. That's right. And so when you start looking at wide distribution of technologies like this to really make the difference, I think there's going to have to be some feet to the fire. And so if decisions are going to be made, so you either quit smoking or it's going to cost you this, or you lose weight or it's going to cost you this, you will see a migration to products that actually end up making it easy. Of course, when that happens and you start using things as a clinical decision support device to actually make financial decisions, to make treatment decisions, these things come with a regulatory cost and hurdle. And I think that's one thing so my struggle as a clinician in science is to pull the companies that are doing sort of the quantitative self thing into let's create something that we can really leverage and make a huge difference. Of course, my bailiwick ends up being the acutely ill, but even from across, see lots of chronic diseases in the emergency department. But that comes with an additional cost. So the consumer market, where there is really little regulatory hurdle, becomes very attractive for companies. But now when you add an extra layer of matrices and metrics that companies have to meet because we're making reimbursement decisions based on this information, it becomes less potentially appealing for companies like Jawbone or Fitbit or the others. So that's one of the challenges we face in terms of advancing the technology to really make a difference in people. So it's not just the one-off. It's just not the handful of stories we want to hear, and they're true. So we'll get back past the smoke and mirrors. I'm a believer. But it's really bringing this that's really going to make an impact on human health. You know, we've got the technology. We just need to merge it with a little more science and epidemiology to make it really come true.
Question in the back.
I do sort of the flip side of acute care. I see young people with chronic diseases. They all have smartphones. They, in theory, would be the perfect audience. But I think there are three big barriers. I take care of people with inflammatory bowel disease. One is they're terrible at being inherent long term. There are always a few people who are really good at it, but as long as they have to do anything harder than breathing, they're very, very bad at entering data. So having some form of passive data collection, your devices are actually critical. Having passive data collection, whether it's movement, I think sound might be an enormous addition, and I think Jawbone might be able to do that. For my patients, being able to count the number of times a toilet flushes is critical, because that gives me important data that they're not going to enter by themselves. A guy named Dan Hamas out at UCLA has invested $10 million of other people's money in trying to do this. They have a Bluetooth-enabled device that can measure inflammation in the stool. After 2 years and $10 million, they figured out that only 50% of people will do it. It's just fundamentally difficult to get people to do anything consistently. Another big barrier is that getting that data to clinicians, unfortunately, a lot of our EMRs, because they're proprietary, it's very hard to get at the APIs and to actually connect and actually bring that data to the clinician. That's a barrier that we have to overcome. And I think, you know, getting that connection, getting passive data collection so it's never harder than breathing, then people will do it. And then we have to prove that these data actually make a difference. Unfortunately, Don out in LA basically has proven after 2 years that it's more cost efficient to call people and harass them to enter data in their smartphones than to get them to touch their stool. So,
No, I mean, Kevin brought it up earlier. Sometimes it's like, if it's available, do you still want to collect it?
yeah.
But there's a lot of opportunity in stool. But there's some interesting work going on out there. But I think what's interesting is that you have to, like, we're with millions of people because we continue to think about the consumer side of that, and we have a lot of work to do. But we say no to certain really amazing projects because it's okay, leave it go. We're not going to go there. Because it's not going to fit into their workflow or in their lifestyle, right? I mean, we angle for stupid millimeters on this thing just because we want it to fit. Just if I have a watch on, that you can also wear it with a watch. And there's other things like that go on. So I really think it's part and parcel of medicine too, and in the institutions, you know, it's like you gotta, as you think about how to help, and passive I think is definitely part of it, and so that you can bring it forward when it's the right moment. Because if you're constantly showering somebody with it, they will turn it off actually quite fast. But if all of a sudden somebody in the background is looking and all of a sudden then does it because you know some shareholder in your life is actually going to do something positive for you, and then you do it, it has a lot more adherent value, right? So it's I think you can't under. I mean, I had people wearing stuff that were like hockey pucks on their arms for a while, and they would still wear it because it had the value. But I've learned a lot over the 15 years that it's like, once you get this really packaged correctly, it can go right off the shelves and start to become something much broader than you would have thought. So I think all conditions, all concerns should be taken with that same grain.
So what about the notion of data ownership? I mean, you could say, you know, in some regards, our own medical records are not really ours because we never get to see them, versus the data that we're collecting ourselves. And then you talked about integrating them into EMRs. So talk a little bit about data ownership in this as well.
Well, we'll probably go back and forth on this. The consumer owns the data in our situation. and they don't get a chance to kind of put it into places probably that would have even more sense. Like EMRs are just not set up for the data to come in. Doctors, frankly, aren't actually designed or trained to do lifestyle management. They're highly trained diagnostics professionals. All this stuff coming together all of a sudden looks like too much data and like keeps me out of focus, and I only have 5 minutes and all this other stuff. So it's like having this stuff show up. Everyone just keeps saying all the time, it's like too much data, or I don't even know what to do with it. So why even take it? But we always have it. We always have ours on our side in terms of ownership is that the consumer owns it and decides what they want to do with it. Surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly for most people, is that they want to share it. They share it social sites. They share it with other people. They challenge other people. They want their doctor to see it. They actually print it out and show, no, this is what's really happening. They collect it for long periods of time. So I don't see there's a lot of other dialogue around this topic, but it feels like this information is important, and I think it's also important. And I want to share it because it also gives context. And what I said earlier, like, if I go in a car and I start doing all these things, but it doesn't understand that I'm in a car, then it's kind of useless. It's the same thing. A lot of these diagnostics or a lot of medicine is done without the context. And if the context can be a key to understanding something more about that individual, it seems like it's pretty interesting. So having that ownership and having it in one place where I can have the access back and forth, and I can take it with me, and people can actually understand what my life is like and how it's impacting. And I can potentially, if I do data science correctly, I can connect the dots. So when my diabetes is high, when my glucose levels are high, what is it about my lifestyle that's affecting? And for all the diabetics I've met, it's always, and when I've looked at their data, it's always different. They always have different things going on. It's a very personalized disease. It's not generalized across everybody. So you almost have to have something that turns on specifically for them. And now they have an opportunity to have a window into their life. They don't have that when they're just looking at glucometer readings or it's sitting in the shelf or someone just keeps giving them drugs.
Yeah, I think that the data ownership issue is really a moot point until we understand what can be done with the data. So from a medical standpoint, I think hospitals, payers, the federal government, until we can show that the data is actually going to make a difference in outcome and lower cost, ownership of the data, it becomes really less relevant. All right. So I think, doing the good science, we can do this under protocols where data ownership rules are done in the context of institutional review boards and data is protected. All the HIPAA concerns are there and addressed. But from a widely distributive standpoint to the population, just insofar as it concerns health management, this is not really going to become an issue in my mind, at least, until the data actually means something and we can act on the data. So as soon as data means that you can actually lower the cost of care, prevent readmissions, lower cost of medications, improve longevity, and those sorts of things from really a measurable and metricized area, when that happens, you'll see profuse discussion and rulemaking about how data ownership does. So we talk about devices that have to talk to the EMR. So even interoperability of a wearable device with a cloud smart app that reports and goes into a doctor's computer where you access the EMR, you would think that would be quite simple to solve. There are huge barriers in terms of various vendors who don't want to let you in to do that sort of app development. But again, as soon as we know that quantified wearable data is actually going to become actionable from a medical standpoint to change outcome, that's really what's going to really drive it. So I don't see huge debate and that being the major hurdle to overcome until we show more science in terms of what it means. Again, I'm talking about this in the doctor's office or the hospital or home care, not from a consumer standpoint.
But it's a scale thing too. So what we keep saying is, okay, if we've been knocking on doctors' doors forever, right? If someone's primary physician actually recommended our devices, we'd be going gangbusters. We keep knocking in, and instead we just keep saying, look, we'll go to pseudo environments like Jenny Craig and health clubs, and we'll just go to consumers and we'll go start to show people what all this data can mean and why it might be valuable, right? It's still going to lose context, but at some point, if you have millions out there versus, okay, we got another 100-person study that took 3 years to get through the IRB and funded, and then all of a sudden over here, then what's going to happen? You know, then now the ownership issue or how it gets is still delayed.
If
right?
the University of Michigan showed it worked, it would be adopted everywhere, okay?
It might be
So,
true.
yeah, well,
No, it's true, but there's also like in every, I don't own my data to the point that I think Wes, what you're bringing up is that it's siloed in all these different doctors' categories, and until like the University of Michigan decides to pull it back out and say like at a meta level, so that I can take it with me, or that you can connect the dots for me, even at an individual level. But you start to see a lot of general patterns show up when you actually take it from the EMR or take multiple EMRs across the state of Michigan and also, Illinois and so forth, and start to see what really happens with people. I mean, doctors suddenly can go back to diagnostics because 80% of the stuff is actually already known. What happens next?
right. But we're doing that right now. I mean, if you get in an accident, you get transferred from northern Michigan, I can actually access your medical record. If you have it from the U of M, I can access it before you actually get to me to understand what happened. So in addition to talk to the doctor. So those issues.
Saying ownership is in quotes.
Well, that's right. So those issues are being addressed. The federal, the government and the payers are on this because it makes sense. It was one of the mandates of the Affordable Care Act was sort of data transfer and openness of the EMR. So I think wearable sensing, it's one of those things that are going to come. Again, we'll drill down to the real details of that once the value proposition is really shown on a population basis of management of certain diseases.
What about aggregating of that data, though? Because, we're talking about good data scientists, and if it's all caught up in, it may all go to the cloud, but it's in a bunch of actual private clouds, not really in one homogeneous cloud where we can all kind of figure out what all these extra data points mean to do the kind of research you're talking about.
Well, I mean, but I think that's the point. So for research, we have to make certain special exceptions. We have to create certain conditions. You want to do this on a level. This is lots of data. The thing about quantified self data, if you haven't got it, so when you start doing taking disparate variables that these monitors measure, you start putting them into context. What do all these things have in common? They require huge amounts of data. So in computation, so it's one part sensor, which is what you're wearing. The other big part behind the scenes is the computational medicine and the bioinformatics that go into determining what those variables mean. That's why you can wear some of the Jawbone products and know whether you're bicycling or you're driving in a car or whether you're asleep. What these things have in common, the algorithms have an insatiable appetite for data. So this is why they have 1 trillion data points. It's not because they just like collecting data. It's because you need 1 trillion data points to make sure that you're 80% or 90% accurate 80 or 90% of the time. And so this is okay if you're on a weight loss clinic, but as a clinician, I can't afford to be right only 70% of the time. And so again, from a big data standpoint, we're going to have to set the rules, do the studies on a multi-center level, and drill down to the physiology to make sure that the data we're getting from this actually makes sense. So to really manage someone's diabetes so they don't have life-threatening complications is a different value proposition than helping someone lose 5 or 10 pounds.
So, yeah, there's some questions. So I just had one quick comment. I'll take the question. I mean, I think there's a couple different points to that. So
I would love with your product, by the way.
No, I know, but I would not throw aggregated data out to just anybody.
This is true.
To have a hack that's saying they're going to take that we're just going to give to the whole world all this data, and some hack's going to come up with something, and they're going to say this is the correlation that exists, and this is what the new diagnostic is. One person, so to speak, looking at like 10 data points that they just decided were conveniently there, who didn't have the right rigor with statistics and so forth. That's very dangerous. I think that can be, and it happens in the quantified self community, frankly. They're one-offs. They're not quantified mass. And what's interesting about what we're talking about is that we have quantified mass. So we can actually do some really interesting correlations. But what keeps happening is because of liability and other things, we actually go to the 0 point of we should just do nothing, or we should do it in little steps and pieces, and one day in the future it'll be interesting. It's kind of but that's really frustrating for me because you never get to the point of taking the leap of faith. I'll give you a totally different example in medicine. So I work with firemen, and I talked to the chief there, and he says, I go like, this goes to your point of accuracy, like 50%. And they can't afford to be 70%, right? It has to be way up above. So they have wireless equipment. They used to never have wireless equipment when they went into buildings. So suddenly Motorola shows up with wireless equipment, and lo and behold, when all this water starts shedding onto the building, the wireless goes down. And they go like, so why did you wear it? He says, because it was better than zero. And even when the guy got to the edge of the building or when there wasn't water, we had comms, which we never had comms before. So when I talk to him about putting physiological monitors on people, it says, if I know this kind of stuff, it's better that we have zero. Now, liability, I've got city council members yelling at us for doing trials with these guys because of workman's comp on the union side and on the city side. It's like crazy, right? But that being said, it's still the same point. Like, my son falls over in a bed with diabetes, like a hypoglycemic situation. If I know that they were in bed and they fell over even, it's not about whether or not the glucose level was accurate. It's just the fact that I understand the context and I know to rush into the room because I got alerted. But right now, because of the liability, I don't even want that information. As a parent, I would do that in a heartbeat. As a medical system, we say no. And then we go to 100%. And I don't understand the 100% anymore because I've been doing this for a while, and we've seen a lot of great stuff. I mean, our little toy product actually does some pretty interesting things, in this ICU opportunity. And it's like, give it a shot. You'll learn some stuff. If you have mavericks like this guy, you might learn something. But also, I think if we do it in scale and mass, you'll learn a lot. And I think that's where we have to do this aggregate, but we have to do it with a lot of care. Right? You just can't throw it out there, and these one-offs just do not work. So I'm sorry. Go ahead. It's more interesting questions.
So I'm interested in measuring biomolecules, and I'm just curious if you guys can comment on what is the role of the FDA in regulating these types of devices that would be able to measure biomolecules, even if they're not used for diagnostic purposes, but just for the quantified self. Like if I want to know what's going on with my own body, perhaps I'm exercising and I want to see the effect on a physiological level, would that be regulated, or is there a role?
Yeah, no, so it's all in what the claim is when you go for the FDA. So if you just say your sensor measures sodium in sweat as a biomolecule, that's probably not going to reach a very high regulatory hurdle. You'll just have to prove to the FDA that you can measure sodium. If you say this device measures sodium to prevent a medical condition that you actively manage, then you've got another hurdle. And so those are things that are going to really require more proof. So it really depends on what the claim is. If you just say we're measuring this and it's up to the consumer to decide, and that was the process with 23 and me in terms of how you use the data. I think they sort of got a raw deal, but that's sort of the hurdle. So the lowest, the pathway in initially is just saying what you're measuring and then let consumers or healthcare professionals act on that without the company making any hint about what you're supposed to do with that data.
Thank you.
I have a question from the standpoint of decreasing healthcare costs or developing a commercialized product. What sensor do you wish you had?
Any of the ones that I don't have currently.
Could you be more specific?
Yeah. So I want things that are sort of more tied to more physiology. I mean, for me, it's a little bit about detecting bad things that are going to happen before they happen. So I don't think that there's any silver bullet. There's no single signal. So again, going back to engineering and computational medicine, so if you can measure an ECG signal, for example, there's information that you can extract from that signal that's invisible to the naked eye. Okay, so this is where really it gets interesting. So, Evo has Jawbone has a whole city of engineers that are working on this. So, whether it's a vibration from an from an airplane wing, or it's an ECG signal, there's things that you can extract that are meaningful. So then you have to map those changes to a patient's condition, and that's what we did with this data to sort of detect hypovolemia. But combining multiple signals, so if I see something in the ECG signal that's interesting, I would like to combine that, for example, with sleep patterns. Those things, so with actigraphy, may really mean, so that we call this sort of feature extraction. What are those things that are meaningful, and mapping them to ground truth, which is an agreement, if you're talking about something medical, that all clinicians say you have this condition, and then you map that backwards based on the series of signals. So I think interesting things that we don't commonly collect. So skin temperature, which is something that the Jawbone device collects. We found that interesting for hemorrhage, for example, and overwhelming infection, and that makes sense because skin perfusion is connected with skin temperature. So if you don't perfuse your skin for certain reasons, then that's a temperature issue. The problem is if you ever go in a hospital, what's the temperature in the hospital? It's kind of cold, right? And so you're cold and clammy, and so now all of a sudden perhaps that valuable signal, which is valuable in one aspect, becomes a little more complicated to interpret in another. So context, as Ivo has talked about, is really extraordinarily important in terms of interpreting the signal. Whether you're asleep, what the so heat flux, so one of the great things I like about the Jawbone device is that it's just not skin temperature, it's also what the ambient temperature is in the environment. So taking that delta is very important. But again, that's really tightly physiologically linked. And of course, metabolism is tied to what? To body temperature and your heat flux, how much heat you lose. And so there ends up becoming a science to this that really makes sense and is convincing for clinicians to buy in terms of what the data means. So the short answer for this, I would like more information that actually reflects metabolism and context. And that's why we became interested, and we've moved beyond the smoke and mirrors to sort of convince ourselves that it's really valuable. And we've compared some of that data to actually gold standard devices like metabolic carts, which actually measure how much oxygen you're actually consuming. Okay, so it doesn't really get much better than that.
Yeah, I always think it's a good question on what the sensor is, but a lot of people then take it to the Holy Grail sensor idea, and so I'm biased. We've been multi-sensor from day one. One of the reasons why we're multi-sensor is because, like, if it's just a heart rate monitor, I might be nervous because I'm sitting and talking with you. I might be weightlifting. I might be stressed out in a car. I might be walking. The heart rate monitor has no idea, right? And the signals inside actually have no idea, right? The temperature has no idea of what happened before that. And so having multi-sensors, even at the signal level, they're contextual for each other. But we were also looking at multi-sensors because we want to hit like things like sleep and workouts and what I might be picking up, what I might be eating, and your emotion, and whether or not your mind centering and so forth, like all these different things that go across your life. So we were trying to figure out, okay, how would you actually pick that up with something that's like, $10 of sensors wearing around, and the infrastructure comes with you versus putting all the sensors in the environment and your car and all these other things. So multi-sensor ended up having to be the economic way to get there, and a bunch of computer science techniques to kind of accelerate it to market. What we've learned in that process is that there is a lot of things going on with the body. If you start looking at things like, perfusion levels of the skin, and you look at like arterial and venous kind of systems, and you look at respiration, and you start to understand that you could pick up a lot of what's going on through the person through the day, even at a diagnostic level. We're missing some of that stuff. But I don't say what's the right sensor, right? I keep thinking about what's the right parameter. If someone said hydration, now I think I go back and figure out what's happening with the body on hydration. And if I can't do it, I probably can't do it with just one sensor for the points I've made before. So I would pick some things that would go there. And I probably have a pretty good guess already, but I'm thinking more about the benefit to the end person, or to the doctor or the consumer or someone. And then we go back and and then we think about power, and then we think about how we're going to strap it on something because wires don't work. Big sizes obviously don't work. Putting things on my head with a bunch of EEG mappings around my head don't really work, right? Putting things on my fingers because GSR really works well there. I can't type anymore. I can't shake your hand. All these things don't work, to some of the comments that were made earlier. So I don't think of it as a sensor. I want to say more about like what's the real issue. Like he was trying to do hemorrhagic shock, right, and bleeding and sepsis. Other times you're trying to do a metabolic cart, trying to be as good on calories burned for all the activities in the day. Sometimes you're trying to be a PSG for sleep studies. So you start thinking about what physiologically are the things that happen. How could I pick them up in a very low power kind of compact way? And then what the sensor ends up being is a sensor fusion thing that ends up being a derived thing from those multiple signals into a sensor by itself, but it's a virtual sensor now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the next frontiers in sensing is going to be implantable sensors. I mean, that's the only really place to go. So actually a lot of things, because of MEMS technology and miniaturization, don't be surprised if the proposition exists 10 years from now that we'll just implant this for you. Now we can get really rapid access to metabolites, but also temperature and pressure and all those other things. So that's, that becomes a more interesting, upper level of quantified self.
Still multi-signal, you got to drive it, you got to power it, so you probably have
now
stuff on the outside.
yeah, but now it's a part of you. It's not like you can turn it off or take it out.
All right, I'm going to kind of cut this. We're getting short on time, and I want to get through at least maybe one, maybe two more people. So if we try to do both quick questions and quick answers.
Well, here's one more person. Thank you for appearing here today. It's really very interesting. But at the moment you mentioned diabetes, I happened to be thinking of an article I read not too long ago to the effect that if you have a wearable glucometer, if you have a wearable insulin pump, and you add to that a hefty dose of computational intelligence, a non-trivial dose of computational intelligence, then you have what's being referred to as an artificial pancreas, something that can predict trends in blood glucose and respond by pumping the appropriate dose of insulin. And here we're going one step beyond the idea of a dashboard into an active device that's essentially replacing the function of a malfunctioning organ. And you mentioned implantable sensors and whatnot, and this would fall directly into that. So where do you see all that going, and what maybe are some other similar applications where the computational intelligence may exist to achieve that kind of a thing?
Real fast, I mean, there's a lot of convergence. We used to run all our algorithms on servers. Now we run them right on board, right? We don't even use a phone. So we can actually do it on an embedded system. And we figure out ways to optimize, but there's other things we want to do that probably have to run on the phone, and it may also, to connect the dots, may have to go up to the server, right? Because you want to look at longitudinal data. But a lot of that's actually coming on board. I think a lot of things right now, it's great that those devices are happening. I think they're suffering from the lack of context, frankly, because they're still trying to be a direct measure to a certain.
Well, it's a real-time problem.
And I think the other thing that's interesting is that they're still very clunky. So, my kid who's 6 years old who has type 1, mine doesn't, but they're not going to wear it because it has this institutional feel to it and it is pretty clunky. So it will get more synergized and smaller and so forth. But I think acting on a glucometer or acting on a thermostat or acting on, the playlist that comes on, they're kind of similar concepts. One is more diagnostic, obviously, but this automation of stuff has a lot of benefit depending on what the concern or what what level you're talking about.
Of course, the FDA gets heavily involved.
Yeah. So what you've described is automated loop or continuous loop therapy. So again, a lot of this is a regulatory issue, and so it is okay to autopilot a 747 with 500 people on board with no concern, but we don't have one FDA-approved thing except for an insulin pump that can take data. We have no other products like that. So we can't even take a mechanical ventilator, which is doing the breathing for you. We're not even allowed to hook that up to a pulse oximeter and have an algorithm that lowers the oxygen level from the ventilator based on what your pulse ox reading is. So
that's like a direct one-to-one correlation.
That's right. I mean, so Europe has it. Okay. So closed loop. This is a great next frontier for quantified self, where you're taking the data and you're driving therapy in a continuous, thoughtless manner. So it's devices talking to each other. So there's, again, this issue of interoperability. But then there's this strange regulatory hurdle where it's okay to ferry 500 patients by autopilot across the Atlantic Ocean, but I can't operate a ventilator with a little feedback.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut this off here. We've gone 10 minutes over. A couple things is that both of them will be up here up front to continue some conversations here. The next BioArbor is April 30th. It's the role of corporate investors in life science companies. We're going to have a couple very highly sought-after guests, Brian Gallagher and Sami Hamed of Aberdare and SR1. So I'll see you then, and thank you to our sponsors, and good evening.
Thanks for having me.